And
hello and welcome to World Sand Project. I am the magical sand princess, Shelley Carney.
if you don't believe she's magical, you just got to hang around with her for a while. Magic things happen when she's around.
That's right.
So. My name is Toby Younis. I'll be your host and moderator today, along with my partner here. And we've got a lot of things going on, and we've got about 45 minutes to do it. So I'm going to pop into the intro, and then we're going to be off and running here. Oh, by the way, I know you get tired of me saying this, but we have a beautiful sample today. Yeah, it really is. It's just one of the best-looking samples I've seen so far. Well, maybe since the Delray Beach in Florida. It's kind of like that. It's got a big variety in it, and it's got a little story to tell. But first of all,
housekeeping, you want towels?
Because towels are important when you're out collecting sand. You just want to keep clean, you know. Make sure you like this video before you leave today. YouTube likes it when you like our video, and the Magical Sand Princess likes it when you like our video. Share it with your family, your friends, your neighbors, your business associates, the entirety of your social networks so that we can
grow the channel.
And last but not least, because we're getting close to that 100 number, if you're not already a subscriber, this would be the ideal time to subscribe.
Oh,
click on that button, and when you see the notifications bell, ring the notifications bell, and that every time we start a live stream, you will be immediately informed and
in the know.
Because there's nothing better in life than being in the know. I want to take care of a little bit of contacting Brian. Brian Gates, I want you to know that we've received all your emails. We're looking forward to the sand samples, and we're cataloging all the information, including the images that you've sent thus far. So thank you very much for that. Carter, I want you to know that we've received your... Oops, I don't want to show that. That we've received your package. Thank you for that. And I think what I'll do is plan on showing it next Wednesday. So let's exchange emails before then. And if you, I think you mentioned that you wouldn't mind calling in. So let's plan on next Wednesday. That would be February February 5th, next Wednesday. All right.
Yes.
But I will send you an email confirming. And then let me switch over here to this big screen. So, this isn't, this channel was based upon the idea that we've got a recognizable sand shorting occurring on the Earth, and a lot of us aren't taking it seriously. So one of the things that we wanted to accomplish by continuing this show, by building out the channel, is letting people, helping people to become aware that there is a shortage in the same way that we're changing our air and our losing our water, etc. Sand is the same thing, and our children and grandchildren are going to be affected by it. So what I wanted to show you is, if you'd like to know more about the problem, I'm going to switch over to the screen. Did I ask you if you wanted to say something? Because I felt like you wanted to say something.
No.
Okay.
Okay.
We do have a playlist on our channel, and it's called The World's Shortage of Sand. I think there's 35 videos now that cover a whole bunch of area going back several years. The one that got me interested in all of this was this one right here. It's the TEDx talk that was done by Vince Beiser. Vince he wrote the book on the problem. It's called In a Grain of Sand. You can get it online at Amazon. You can get a Kindle version of it, and you can get an Audible version of it. I've got all three, so I'm very aware. But that TEDx talk that he did was what informed me and made me become interested in the problem. And I wanted to find a creative way to communicate the problem to the rest of the world, and that's what the World Sand Project channel is all about. In addition to that, you'll see a link in the description box below to the UN Environmental Report, United Nations Environmental Program Report of 2019, Sand and Sustainability, Finding New Solutions. So if you want a more in-depth look at what the problem is, what's happening, what impact it's happening on especially third world nations, and how people are losing their lives over it. Read this report. It's about 150 pages long, so it's a very comprehensive report, but it's well written. It's written by professionals. And they had, I think there's a list of 25 or 26 people that were part of this report. And of course, Beiser's name is in there as well. The other thing that I wanted to let you know, and I was going to show you the Gmail. Did I print that out? So hang on just a sec.
Not that I know it.
No. What I was going to tell you is that we got a response from, oh, here, I know what it is. So we did get a response from the ISCS, the International Sand Collectors Society, and they've accepted our application, and they provide a little bit of information. But in addition to that, we discovered, of course, that they produce a quarterly newsletter called the Sandpaper. Okay. So it's 13 pages long, and it's very informative. I will put a link to that because it's a PDF file. I forgot to put a link in there before, but I'll put a link to it. And if you want to become a member, if you're a new member, your first year's membership is free if you think of yourself as a sand collector. What I'm most interested in is they promoted on their website, they talk about their sand conference. They get together at a larger conference that deals with geology, but they all get together. The last time it was in Florida. So I'm really interested in and that was in September of 2019. So I'm really interested in attending the 2020 version. So they haven't published any information on it, but again, it's kind of a cool newsletter. It has a lot of information, and you know, who knew there were people that took this so seriously? They have an organization to support them. So I decided we're going to become a member of that. Okay. So let's go on to our sample today. Our sample is from the island of Kauai in the Hawaiian chain out in the Pacific. The Hawaiian chain is about 2,600 miles west of Los Angeles. And the island that we're on today is the oldest and the furthest away from Los Angeles. Let's pop open the screen, take a look at the map. So this actually represents the distance from my little house here in Bernalillo, New Mexico to Kauai. And again, the distance from here to here is about 2,600 miles for those of you that have flown it either from Los Angeles, from San Francisco. It's a little bit longer, but not much. And that's where you come out of. I know you can also get it to Hawaii from Seattle, for those of you who have taken that route. Again, we're on the island of Kauai, which is the last in the chain. I think there are 9 islands total in the Hawaiian chain. This is the biggest island and the youngest. That's what they call the Big Island. And that also has the largest volcano, Mauna Loa, on there. And what's interesting about this chain of islands is Mauna Loa is 13,000 feet above the ground from the surface of the island to the tip of the volcano is 13,000 feet. But that island is in a place in the ocean where the top of the island is 20,000 feet above the surface, not the surface of the sea, the bottom of the sea, right? So that means Mauna Loa is actually 33,000 feet tall because that's one of the volcanoes that built Hawaii. That makes it taller than the tallest mountain on the surface of the earth, which of course you guys know is,
I don't know, Mount Everest?
no, very good. Mount Everest, 29,060 feet or something like that. So when you measure Mauna Loa from the bottom of the ocean, it's actually taller than by at least 3,000 plus feet, maybe 4,000 feet taller than Mount Everest. So we're out here on Kauai, and we're on what I'd call the southeast coast of Kauai, and it looks like that. Kauai was also built as a volcano, and as I said, it's the oldest of the island chain. You can see its shelf around the island. Now, it was funny because there were several volcanoes on the island. The one in the center eventually collapsed. The volcanic cavity caldera collapsed upon itself, and then there was another one in this area over here. But there's like all these islands of volcanic bubble underneath it. Now, it's not active by any stretch of the imagination. And so Kauai has developed. The last time I was there was in the early 90s, and Kauai was if you didn't want to deal with all the people on Maui, you went to Kauai. It tended to be less developed back then. I think to some extent it is less developed than either the Big Island or Maui, but it's looking pretty developed to me. So we're right down here on now Willy Willy Bay, and we're looking at, I'm sorry, it's Hawaiian. Okay, what can I say? And we're going to look in real close here, and there is all of this is Willy Willy Bay, and right here is Kalapaki, the beach that we're looking at. And I'm going to switch over now. Actually, let's look at this kind of a broad panoramic view of the location. This is the only picture I have because what I've discovered is that when I pull up the little yellow guy, I actually get some better views of the island. But you can see it's a nice area. If you were to step back from this, it's actually one of the Marriott properties right behind that. So it's the one that's nicely developed. So when I put the sand through this 2 millimeter sieve, the number 10 mesh, it actually divided up. The sample in the on the left is what made it through the number 10 mesh, indicating that's true sand. This didn't. So it's a little bit bigger than sand. But I thought it was so interesting that I'd go ahead and show. We're going to see both of them today. But the sample that I got wasn't big enough for me to actually put in a bottle and put on the Petri dish. These were both very small samples. The advantage is there's some really interesting sand grains in here that include foraminifera, and it includes calcites, and it includes, in one case, a microshell. So I think what's going to be real easy because of its size is that I'll be able to dump this out on a Petri dish and then separate the grains of sand, which is tough. It would have been almost impossible with the sand that we had last week from the Great Sand Dunes National Monument. Boy, it's a good thing you're here. So I think it's going to be real easy to separate with a little patience. And I think over the weekend, I'm going to try and get some pictures of some of the individual objects, sand grains, in this sample because they're really, really interesting. I ran the magnet test on it, and it magnetized 3 layers. It was so magnetic that there were pieces that were stuck out on the plastic side of my little magnet pin. I mean, it was pretty magnetic, and we're going to see some of those in that. Now, again, I had such a small sample. Usually I just brush the magnetic stuff off onto the trash. My sample was so small that I brushed it back into the sample, and we'll see some of that. But you can see, for the most part, it's basaltic with iron in it, iron enough in it to be attracted to the magnet. But it does have some of its own magnetism inherent, and you can tell. So the iron is where the orange comes from. That's the ferrous effect, and that for all intents and purposes, as you've probably seen before, it's rust. So this was the first photograph that I took of the sample, and usually when I take a picture of the sample, as I deal with it, move it around, get it back out from my workbench into here, it moves around. So a lot of the stuff moves around. This didn't. It's such a small sample. So you can see right here is a microshell that's actually a shell, and you can we're going to see it here in just a few moments. Now, one of the interesting things to me was that we had this very translucent quartz, which is not unusual. Down here, or where was it? I don't know if we'll see it in this picture, but it's in the other ones. But then I saw all of this brown stuff. And whenever, quartz turns brown. Quartz, for example, are you wearing your... for example, in a citrine, it's actually iron that causes the color to change. But this was a very dark color. And when I posted it to the geology group in Reddit, one of the questions I got was, is this a glass beach? Now, as you may or may not be aware, there are several, quote, glass, unquote, beaches in the world where trash has been thrown out into the ocean. Some of it's floated away. The glass breaks up, sinks to the bottom of the ocean, and then through actions of the waves ends up on the beach. And of course, not all of that glass is refined enough, processed enough, so that it isn't sharp. Some of it's sharp, so to keep people off the beach. That's one thing. And then there's a glass beach in California near Fort Bragg that's actually become protected. It's not a preserve, but it is protected by the state. So you can't take any of the refined glass, the processed glass. So I started thinking, well, is this a glass beach? And I started looking around. Let me show you what I found. So we're going to go back to the globe here, and this is the adjustable one. Here we are at Los Angeles. Here we are over here in New Mexico, and then here we are in Kauai. So I'm going to zoom in here and come into Kauai. That, again, is the Hawaiian island change, the island of Hawaii, or the one they call the big island over here. But we're going to go to Kauai and get in real close. Now, this is a 3D picture, so it's going to be at an angle. And the first thing I want to do is go into Kalapaki Beach. Now, some people will refer to this as Lihue Beach. And this area over here is called Lihue. And then this is that Marriott property that we were looking at before. So I started wondering, why is there so much of this brown glass on there? Because to get that color of brown would require a lot of iron in the quartz, right? So what I did was, let me see if I can do it again. So what I did was, I got directions and I said, so let's start charting point here. And I said Glass Beach, Hawaii. You can see that I've looked it up. There's the one at Fort Bragg. And there's another one that's the one, Ilele. So we're going to go to that glass beach. And as you can see, the drive is 37 minutes, and it's actually called Glass Beach. But when you go to it, it happens to be a glass beach because it was an industrial area, and people dumped their trash there. And what they dumped was glass. And let me see if I can actually get to it, because there are, let's see, how am I going to do this? Not directions. I don't want directions. I just want, no, we don't want to send to my phone because I'm not going to drive there anytime soon. Let me see. We don't want directions. We just want to go to map. Oh, yeah. Okay. So if I go to the glass beach and I click on the glass beach, I should get some pictures, right? And here are the pictures of that glass beach. So you can see these are nowhere near sand grain size, but there's a lot of brown colors in there. There's a lot of clear colors. So you have to start wondering, these greens are, Heineken bottles. This is a Coke bottle right there. And the brown are probably beer bottles. And so you see a lot of those colors. You look at this one, it's just a little bit more refined. So when we go back to our sample, there's a chance that as those objects of glass went into the water, were washed around the side of the island and ended up on Lihue Beach, or not Lihue, but Kalapaki Beach, that's might be what we're seeing there. What looks like blue here is actually that magnetite that we saw in the magnet. And what makes it look blue is the fact that I use an LED light, a ring light, to light the for the microscope image. And so I think that comes from there. We'll see in just a minute. Okay, so let me go back, and I think that's the last of the photos. A little bit closer look. And then I took a couple of pictures of the bigger material, and I couldn't actually zoom in on the bigger material because it was so big that it just filled the frame up to and including things like this. So those are the pieces that didn't make it through the mesh. And I mean, this is definitely a quartz piece, and it couldn't make it through the mesh, but it was filling the screen of the digital microscope. So let's go over to the microscopes and take a look at them under the stereo microscope. So that is, you'll see, I'm going to step back here, slide back here, I guess, and you'll see as I move this, the first thing that you'll notice is the variety. So this stuff that looks blue is actually very black. It's very, when you saw it attached to the magnet, it had a black look to it.
Looks like a shell too.
That's the same one. That's actually
Oh,
the same shell. So I'm going to come
different.
back to that in just a minute. So that's where you get this variety. Now, as I look in this sample, I can actually pick out that shell in this sample. That's something that I haven't been able to do with my naked eye prior to this. So I'll be able to pick out that shell with some patience. Like I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to dump it in a larger petri dish so that it spreads out over the surface of the dish, then pick out that shell and then focus on it. We're going to zoom in on those. Yeah, it's kind of a U-shaped, right? This one
Yeah,
right
it's
here.
like brown on the edges and white
Right.
in the middle.
So
kinda
that's
interesting.
calcite. At some point, that was part of something more, biogenic. You need somebody to produce that. You need something to produce that. And then there's a foram right down here that we're going to zoom in on just a second as well. And over here, we have a conglomerate that could be described as a breccia. And when geologists look at a conglomerate or a breccia, they're looking at a fist-sized stone. Well, this is one of those same stones that is identified as a rock. I mean, it's one of the, 89 different types of rock or whatever it is, conglomerate and breccia to geologists. And here's a sand-sized particle example. So it really is a very interesting sample. So here's our microshell. These are the magnetite. The ones that look blue are the magnetite that I brushed off the magnet. The white ones are calcite, and I've got to focus on each one because, again, they're so big that...
Tony says, if sand is becoming a scarce world resource, why don't we pulverize landfill into sand?
Because land... I don't know the answer to that question. I guess you could, but I think the problem with landfill... is he talking about, like, garbage landfill? Is that the same thing?
I think so.
So landfill, here's the problem. It costs money. It costs more money to make sand than to dig it up. It costs more money to transport sand. Once you have to transport sand more than 50 miles, it becomes too expensive to the process. So that's why we're still using the sand that is closest to us. And to prove that, drive around your town, look for the nearest dry riverbed, and you will see people working in that dry riverbed because we see it all the time right here in Bernalillo and Rio Rancho. So let me zoom in. Well, before I do that, do I want to show the larger sample first? No, I want to zoom in so we can take a look at some of these. So let's look at the microshell first. And again, you look at the brown colored grains, and they're way more brown than any sand we've ever seen. And that brown the brown tint, the yellowish orange, yellow, brown tint, comes from the amount of iron as the impurity in the quartz. And that just looks like too much. Although, on the other hand, a lot of these pieces look like quartz. The one that's up here right there, it's got indentations, it's got fractures, so it looks less like glass and more like rock, So let's see if we can zoom in on that. Watch out, Tony, this is the part that makes you seasick, so.
Looks like amber is not important. It does.
Yeah, it does look like amber, but again, we're dealing with the Hawaiian Islands where we wouldn't see that, all of this activity. So that's our little microshell right there. And as I said, as I look at the sample, I have it in one of those little quartz crucibles. As I look at the sample, I can actually pick out, which is rough to do any other time. I can find that. So I'm going to spend the weekend digging through this stuff and seeing if I can take individual pictures of each one of these pieces. So over here, let me see if I can get to the breccia. So that's what a geologist would call either, and there's a distinction, I can't remember what it was, but that piece right there is what a geologist would call either a conglomerate or a rock, because it's composed of small pieces of rock being held together by a much finer grain cement. And so they call it a conglomerate. And here, effectively, is a sand-sized version of that geological object. So the other thing that we saw, and I got to zoom out to go find it again. I'm sorry. Was that so? This is I found this one interesting too, as Shelley did. She noted. So this is a form of calcium carbonate. It is It came from a shell. It was probably made by a biogenetic, a creature in the ocean, and it's got such an interesting look to it. I mean, it's just. So the little holes, as I've told you in the past, were actually made by microworms, but it's very obviously calcium. Sitting next to it, these are the magnetite, and the magnetite are basaltic in their nature, and the little orange and red tint comes from the fact that it's iron, Fe, has mixed into it, and that's where it gets its magnetic attraction, aside to having its own magnetic attraction. And scientists use these on a much larger scale. Geologists use these because the Earth's magnetic sphere has flipped over the 4.5 billion years. Actually, it's probably more like 3.5 billion years that the Earth was the Earth. And that flip is actually stored in these tiny little objects. And you can read their magnetic direction. And so they can tell almost precisely when the Earth flipped based on the age of these little tiny grains of sand. So there is one of our old friends, the foraminifera, and that was a shell that belonged to a very small creature. And that shell is used when it sinks to the bottom of the ocean. It's used to date ocean layers, and it's also used to detect the temperature at any given time up to about 200,000 years ago. So they're very important to scientists as well. There's a nice piece of quartz, and that to me looks like quartz. It doesn't look like glass. I did see some Coke bottle colored, and interesting, there is a type of emerald that is referred to as a Coke bottle emerald because it's that same color as the the olden days Coke bottles. And I did see some of that in here as well, some of that Coke bottled colored emerald. But then you see these, and where I thought it was glass would have been too hard for the worm people to get in there and make the worm people. I don't know, the little tiny microworms to get in there. And so you have to wonder, maybe it is just a grain of quartz sand that where the ferric impurity has been introduced. So, but what I liked about this sample is there was a good balance between rocks and minerals in the case of the quartz, and organics in the case of the foraminifera, and then biogenics in the case of some of those, the microshell, because that little tiny microshell was home to something once. And they grew out of it and left it behind, and it ended up on this seashore. So let me put the bigger sample, the sample that didn't make it through the mesh. So I'm not going to call this. Technically I can't call it sand because it's bigger than number 10 mesh. I'm actually going to have to zoom out to get any good look at it.
Not important wants to know, how has radiation affected sand since the 1950s or so?
It depends. So the further away the sand is from the islands on which that testing was done, it doesn't affect it. But if you're near the islands, like everything else, every other object on that island, it has absorbed some of the sand. Now, some of the softer
some of the sand?
I'm sorry, some of the radiation. Some of the softer, rocks are more likely to absorb some of the radiation. Quartz, because it is so hard, is less likely to do that. But by the time, you get to where we are in Hawaii, and in this case, Kauai, which is the farthest island, I can't imagine there's any effect. Now, I haven't tested it, but if you want, I will get a Geiger counter and we'll start checking that as well. That would be fun. I need an excuse to buy a Geiger counter.
Oh, you don't have one?
No, I don't, but now I have a reason. So again, some biogenics right there, calcium carbonate, quartz. So a nice mixture. And again, these are pretty good sized. I mean, if you were to walk on this beach with sand grains this size, you would be able to tell the difference, because of it. So I can't even put this under the polarizing microscope because it's so big. I don't have a lens that's wide enough to even see it. So I'm going to take the other sample. Let me turn this one off. Let me change cameras here. So give me a second while I make this adjustment. We're going to change cameras. And we're going to put the smaller sample under the polarizing microscope. And as you can see, this sand is so close to the 2 millimeter max that these grains actually just fill the frame. And this is at the lowest level of magnification that I've got on this. But when you get to one of the pieces of magnetite, let me find one for you. There's one. So that's a grain of sand, but it's filling the lens on the polarizing microscope. So it's real hard to get any benefit from it in terms of the polarizing microscope. I'm more interested once I separate these grains of sand in a petri dish, or a bigger petri dish. I can separate them out and see if there's any that are sized that fit. So they have nice color. The quartz are, good looking, solid looking quartz. I can't see anything that doesn't look quartz to me. The browns, let me see if I can find one, didn't show up as browns. The organics, of course, do. So that you can tell is biogenic, not genetic, and that's a calcium carbonate base. So, and of course we're dealing, because we're higher magnification, we're dealing with a very smaller depth of field. So I actually prefer, in this case, looking at this sample because of the size of the grains under the stereo microscope, because I think you get a better feel for it. But even when I take this, so let's take this one sample, one grain here that looks like calcium, and zoom in on it. And even for the stereo microscope, you start getting to frame filling size with these things. So I think individually, I think this is one of those samples. So I'm not even at full magnification on the stereo microscope, and it's filling it. So that's full magnification right there on the stereo microscope. And from past samples at full magnification, we didn't fill the screen with a single grain of sand. In this case, these grains are so big, no bigger than 2 millimeters, because they do fit through the mesh. It fills it. So, okay, so an exciting sample for me, because it had such a variety of objects inside of the grains, including the biogenics, the foraminifera, the magnetite, the microshells, the quartz that was transparent, and some of the brown stuff, which I'm not sure. I think it would take a scientist better than, well, I'm not going to say I'm a scientist. It would take a true scientist to look at that and determine whether it's glass or just quartz with impurities in it. I'm voting for glass. I think it's just too brown for that much impurity, So let me see. What do I need to remind you of? I need to remind you. Oh, go back to last Wednesday's show and make a comment. Because if you make a comment, you'll have a chance to win either this photo, which is the sand from our Wednesday show, the Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve. And whoever asked me the question, or somebody asked me a question in comments about what's the difference with the park and preserve. I didn't know the answer, so I Wikipedia'd it, and there's this complex. I actually sent them the link because it's like, oh,
Too much to explain.
yeah, it's bigger than a comment's worth. So next Wednesday, if you go back, we'll go back to last Wednesday's show, look at the comments, and select the winner from for the picture, and then there'll be a second prize on that day, and that will be the pendant from the from the Sand Dunes National Monument. So we'll be
We
giving
have
those
a
away.
comment from Lorraine.
Yeah.
She says, I received my White Sands pendant. I love it.
Oh,
One of
good.
a kind. Thank you, Toby and Shelley, and thank you, Corey Jacobs, for letting it roll.
Oh, bless, they're both our hearts.
Yeah.
So, in addition to that, next Wednesday we have a friend. His name is Tony Henman, and earlier in his life, he sold jewelry, and he's retired now. And he had a collection of this jewelry, mostly pendants with gemstones in them. This is one of the pieces that he sent Shelley, that piece of quartz. But he's had gemstones in a lot of them, and he asked us to pay it forward. He said, I'm going to send them to you. You figure out a way to pay it forward. So our first thought, of course, is that I'm going to take some of it when I go to the World Series of Fen. We're going to put some of it in our treasure chest that we're hiding for A Gypsy's Kiss. But starting next week on both, because A Gypsy's Kiss has a lot of things going for it, starting next week on this channel and the softer side, Shelley's channel, we're going to start giving the gemstones away. And so we'll work it the same way. You just have to make a comment. We'll pick one of the gemstones. We'll show it to you on a Wednesday, and then the following Wednesday we'll pick a winner of that gemstone. And the only rule we're going to make is you can't win two of them, right? Once you've won one, even if your name is picked again, you make a comment and your name is picked again, we'll spin until somebody else gets it. Because Tony's idea was to spread this out, to spread it out as much as we can, because he wanted to pay it forward. He asked us to pay it forward, and we think this is a good way to do it. So join us next Wednesday. We'll pick one of the gemstones and pendants. And even if you like me, don't wear pendants, gemstones, then feel free to comment and win it, and give it to someone who you care about of the opposite gender.
Yeah. Or your mom.
Or your mom.
Sister. Or
Yeah, and you got Valentine's. Will we do it? Yeah, we'll even be able, no, I'm not going to. Yeah, the 5th. And then
14th is a Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll be able to do one before Valentine's Day, so you'll have something to
Yeah.
give.
There's two of them before Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have one more question.
Okay, go ahead.
From Not Important, and says, what would hazardous waste do to sand, like a runoff of it? Would it turn it to glass?
So the funny part about it is I don't know of any situation. So there are situations all over the world where hazardous waste is mismanaged. To the best of my knowledge, with sand, that's not the problem. The sand is that it is unmanaged. And so people don't care about it they're not protecting it from mismanagement, they're protecting it from non-management. And the reason is there are if you look at that set of videos, that playlist that we shared with you, there are sand mafias in the world. There are people that are killing other people over the sand on their property. It's happening in India. It's happening in Eastern Europe. It is happening to some extent in Russia. It's happening to some extent in the islands in the Pacific and in the Indian Ocean. So that isn't as much a problem as the inability to control the use of sand, to manage the use of sand, not to stop the use. We can't stop using it. It's in your house. It's in the glass. It's in the glass that Shelley's drinking. It will use to filter the water that she's drinking from that glass. It's in the silicon chips and all this technology in front of me. So you can't stop using it. You just have to figure out how to control its use so it's used in a wiser way. And what we need to do is look for all alternatives. The average house requires 200 tons of sand. tons of concrete, 75%, 65 to 75% of which is sand. So what we have to do is look for alternative ways or using alternative materials to build houses, to build roads, and then use the sand where it's important to us, like glass. We love sitting outside. On the other hand, we don't need entire buildings built whose outsides are built from glass. That's kind of overdoing it when an architect makes that decision. And don't get me wrong, I'm related to a couple of architects. My daughter and my son-in-law are both architects. And one of the things that they do is design buildings that consume less resources and require fewer resources to maintain. So architects are aware of the problem. And I don't know necessarily that is as much an issue associated with the management of hazardous waste as it is with the management of sand as a resource. Because you do, and if I compare it to the problems that we already have, the two other resources that precede sand in utilization and are air and water, and we have to, we've accommodated both of them by as much as we can. Accommodated them by protecting them from the various forms of hazardous waste. In the case of air, it's carbon. In the case of water, it's everything that people throw into water, including their trash. So eventually we may have to get to that point. That's not the problem right now. The problem right now is the overuse and the fact that there are people stealing sand from other people in order to make a profit from it, including right here in beautiful downtown Rio Rancho. Mm-hmm. Okay, so again, remember, if you want to learn more about the problem, I'm going to close this window, I'm going to open this window, and I'm going to share this frame with you. If you care to learn more about the problem, we do have a playlist called The World's Shortage of Sand, and I would strongly recommend, if you only had time to watch one of those videos, watch this one. It's Vince Beiser's TEDx talk, and it's the one that was the inspiration for me to build the World Sand Project. Okay? Okay. Let's... And...
Thanks for watching today. Thanks for all your comments. Make sure you do put comments on the finished videos, especially the ones on Wednesdays, so you can win a prize. And for World Sand Project, I'm Shelley Carney.
And I'm Toby Younis. Thanks for joining us. Make sure you tune in at 4 o'clock for the softer side. Shelley has a very special guest, which I think is going to be darned interesting.
Yeah.
And then, of course, tonight at 7 o'clock for A Gypsy's Kiss, where we will talk about the Fen treasure. Otherwise, thanks for joining us today. We hope you found it interesting, informative, and perhaps even entertaining.